Does life seem a little bit strange to you? Life certainly seems a little bit strange to me. I imagine if you are listening to this, that life seems strange to all of us at the moment. Things have gone weird in our politics, in our society. The world around us seems to be stranger and stranger, and we are looking for sources of knowledge, sources of wisdom, people to guide us through this strange lifetime that we are living through. And I can think of no better guide to our strange times than Philip K. Dick. It's very likely, if you are listening to this, that you best know Philip K. Dick as a science fiction writer. And whilst I mean no offense to the community of science fiction writers and to the fans of science fiction out there, and I don't want to trigger them, although I know it's inevitable that this will trigger some people, I don't think the best way to think of Philip K. Dick is as a science fiction writer, although he certainly was a science fiction writer, in some ways the science fiction writer, but he was also something else. The reason that the movies based on the novels of Philip K. Dick have been so iconic to our culture, the reason that when I was growing up I could walk into any bookshop and find shelves and shelves and shelves of Philip K. Dick's novels, the reason why all of you listening know the name Philip K. Dick is not because he was a science fiction writer, it's because he was something more. And I want to suggest that the best way to understand Philip K. Dick is as a prophet. Yes, as a prophet. And not even a prophet in the sense of Nostradamus, not some kind of mystical individual who we believe, although we know it's not true, but we believe in some sense, saw into the future and made predictions of the future, although on some level there are predictions of our future to be found in Philip K. Dick. I mean, a prophet in the religious sense of the word, that a prophet is a proclaimer of the will of God. Some of you are running a mile at the mention of that word, but it's undoubted that, especially later in his career, Philip K. Dick became a theologian, at the very least, a believer in some sense, in some power that we might call God. A prophet in the sense of an inspired speaker of truth. And where did that inspiration come from? And what are the truths that Philip K. Dick, the prophet, might be able to teach us? I think it helps to think about the career of Philip K. Dick. In that career, he was certainly a science fiction writer. The active career of Philip K. Dick begins around the year 1952, and for a decade until 1962, Philip K. Dick was almost an unremarkable writer of many science fiction novels and many more science fiction short stories. And he was writing at a time in the 1950s where the print story, print magazines, print novels were an almost unopposed form of entertainment. Many of those stories were also transferred to the radio, and you can find many amusing adaptations of Philip K. Dick's stories to the radio. But the print word was king, and Philip K. Dick managed to eke out a living as a not very successful, almost run-of-the-mill author of short stories and novels. And in a way, this period, although of course it established the basis for his later success wasn't very helpful to Philip K. Dick, because he learned to write science fiction stories that caught the reader with an amazing idea, a strange or wonderful twist on reality. And he wrote many such stories, but becoming trapped in that trick of the storyteller almost locked Philip K. Dick out from becoming a more successful writer, becoming a more well-rounded author of fiction and a storyteller. And something to think about all the way through Philip K. Dick's career is that he never really mastered storytelling in the sense that many other authors did. Instead, Philip K. Dick was always trading in amazing ideas, and perhaps it was that need to always find the next twist on reality that led Philip K. Dick to become a prophet of some kind. The main body of Philip K. Dick's work was produced between 1962 and 1974, and it begins with the novel The Man in the High Castle. And this is also the period when he produced Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Ubik, Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said, The Free Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, and most of the novels for which he was most famous and is still most remembered today. The shift was that Philip K. Dick began thinking about deeper themes. He became very interested in the dynamics of human morality, and particularly themes of empathy that he explored by thinking about how did the Nazis come to and hold power in The Man in the High Castle. And Philip K. Dick was quoted as saying that he couldn't complete the sequel to that novel because he just couldn't stay in the psyche of the Nazis any longer to continue writing the story. The theme of empathy and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? What would lead humanity to once again enslave sentient life forms and hunt them through the streets? And it was these deeper themes that informed all of Philip K. Dick's multiple award-winning novels through this most productive decade of his work. And then around the years 1972, 73, and 74, Philip K. Dick produced A Scanner Darkly. This was the novel with which he attempted to become a mainstream novelist. He drew very heavily on his own autobiographical life experiences, combined them with some very original science fictional ideas, but the novel was not a success. And then what really took Philip K. Dick in a new direction, what was going to move him beyond his frustrations that he couldn't break into the mainstream, that his background as a science fiction author had given him the wrong kind of brand for publishers to pick up on. And from his early work, he had learnt to work with amazing philosophical ideas, but he hadn't really learnt the storytelling that would have allowed him to become a novelist, say, like Thomas Pynchon, who he has a lot in common with. What happened to Philip K. Dick instead were the events that he would later refer to as 2374, a period of a few weeks in the year 1974, when Philip K. Dick had what we would have to call a spiritual awakening. A series of visions, one might call them hallucinations perhaps, in which he believed to have seen through to new layers of reality. This began with a trip to the dentist and then dosed up on sodium pentothal. A visitor, a young woman, came to Philip K. Dick's house, and he saw her wearing a fish necklace, the fish being the symbol of ancient Christianity. And then over the next few days, Philip K. Dick believed that he saw to a truer level of reality where he was still living in ancient Rome And he was a Christian, hiding from the evil authorities of ancient Rome. He also saw a series of visions projected onto the walls of his home at the time, and then believed that he was struck with a pink light that he would later seek through the rest of his life, a pink light that transmitted into his mind a deeper understanding of reality. And Philip K. Dick would explore that understanding through the V.A.L.I.S trilogy that begins with V.A.L.I.S and then the Divine Invasion and then the Transmigration of Timothy Archer. V.A.L.I.S stands for Vast Automated Living Intelligence System. Philip K. Dick's metaphor for God in his exploration of Christian theology, an exploration he would capture in words in his Exegesis that would not be published until many years later, something like 8,000 handwritten pages of notes trying to understand the deep mysteries of Christian theology and indeed the deep mysteries of the universe. You can compare this period of Philip K. Dick perhaps to the work of Carl Jung, which I have mentioned in previous essays. Jung's exploration, when he retreated from the world for a number of years, retreated into his imagination and created his Red Book. And we can think of these as two almost contemporary, modern contemporary sacred texts that arise from the deep exploration of the human psyche and imagination by two great figures of the 20th century, Carl Jung and, of course, Philip K. Dick. And while Carl Jung would capture his ideas in many, many books, attempting to understand and to create a new framework for the human psyche and for human reality, Philip K. Dick had, of course, captured his ideas through stories, through the writing of short stories, and through novels. So Philip K. Dick's prophecies for our world, the truths that he was exploring, came through the symbolic language, the metaphors of science fiction storytelling. It's worth, of course, taking a moment to think about the films that Philip K. Dick is primarily known through. The first of these, of course, and the most famous by far, Blade Runner, Ridley Scott's breakthrough science fiction movie, combined with the music of V.A.L.I.S and the ideas of Philip K. Dick to produce probably the most powerful piece of mythic storytelling of the 20th century, certainly up there with 2001, A Space Odyssey, Blade Runner, a movie that has fascinated audiences now for somewhere around 40 years, but also Total Recall, Paul Verhoeven's super violent take on one of the short stories of Philip K. Dick that does, through the somewhat twisted lens of Paul Verhoeven, also famous for movies like RoboCop, Starship Troopers, someone who loved to pick up science fiction stories and twist them and almost somewhat make fun of them. And in Total Recall, Paul Verhoeven is making fun of this psychedelic odyssey that Philip K. Dick had sent his characters on. Also Minority Report, of course, Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise, probably the blandest of the famous science fiction movies, blockbuster cinema based on the work of Philip K. Dick, because Spielberg did what at least a dozen other Hollywood filmmakers did. He took an interesting idea from Philip K. Dick and then tried to attach to it a formulaic Hollywood story, a cop chase thriller, and all of the formulaic stuff is rather boring and uninteresting. And then finally, A Scanner Darkly, Richard Linklater's animated rotoscoped version of probably Philip K. Dick's greatest mainstream literary novel, and Richard Linklater also a very interested filmmaker. So great artists have been attracted to Philip K. Dick, but even including Richard Linklater and Ridley Scott, I don't think anybody has really captured Philip K. Dick's visionary prophecies for our time on a screen. The place you have to go to for them is to the books and to the short stories, and that's where I want to take you back to now. And I would like to explore nine of the prophetic visions that Philip K. Dick left us that help us to understand the strange world that we are now living in. 9 prophecies for our times. The exit door leads in is perhaps Philip K. Dick's happiest story, but when you look at it a little bit more deeply, you find, as always with Philip K. Dick, the seeds of paranoia and suspicion. At the bottom of it is the story of an ordinary man who wins a contest from a vending machine to go to the greatest school of his society, his near future society, and to be given a great engineering education. But at this school, the man stumbles across a piece of information, a secret piece of information in a database, and he decides, as he has been told to do, to give it back to the authorities of the school. And it turns out that following the advice of the authorities was the wrong decision. This was a test. And by failing the test, he is then thrown out of the school, and he goes back to the vending machine to try and get another entry to the exit door that led in. But there is no more opportunity for him. He failed the test. What are we being told here by Philip K. Dick? Maybe it's something like, maybe in the wonderful imagery of that story, maybe it's something like, look out for the hidden rules of your society. Don't take on face value the advice you are given by authorities. In the case of this story, we are shown this in a positive light, that the authorities want the citizens of their nation to rebel. They want them to have a free spirit and to practice creativity. But we might suspect that Philip K. Dick was commenting on the unwritten rules of the society in which he lives, and all of us find ourselves living in which very often the spoken, written morality of a society that are encoded in its rules aren't really, we suspect, what you're supposed to do. And the people who are successful in the society are the people who habitually break those rules. Look for the hidden rules of your society. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is Philip K. Dick's most famous novel, made famous by Blade Runner, the movie that was based upon it. I feel almost entirely certain that less than 1 in 10 of the people who have seen Blade Runner, or perhaps even 1 in 100, have read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is a shame because the novel has much more to say than was ultimately encapsulated in the movie Blade Runner. The novel is an exploration of what would bring a country like the United States of America back to once again enslaving sentient beings, as the United States did for many centuries with the black African slaves who were transported to its shores. And the Blade Runner, Rick Deckard, at the heart of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, is a slave hunter. He is paid bounties to hunt down slaves, but ironically he wants to kill these machines so he can buy himself a real sheep, a being that he can have empathy for. And we're left to wonder, does the android, Rick Deckard, dream of electric sheep? But beyond that science fiction idea is the idea of empathy. that we as humans are not automatically human. We are more like an android. We are a set of reactions. We are a program running, a program installed by our culture running on a biological android machine body. And that's the reality of being a human being. And that the only way to escape that reality and to become fully human is to grow our empathy, to empathize with animals, to empathize with other humans, especially the humans who are othered in our society. This act of denying humanity to other humans so we can use them as androids, as machines, as slaves, as part of the machinery of our society. But as long as we fail to see the othering structures of our society, like the structural racism that still persists in our society today very strongly, we fail at becoming humans ourselves. We pay the ultimate cost of our lack of empathy by never becoming a true human ourselves. Grow your empathy. Learn to see the othering of others to become humans yourself. The eighth prophecy of Philip K. Dick. Chains of Air, Web of Aether by Philip K. Dick is probably the author's least known story. It was a short story, a novella, a longer short story that he wrote late in his career that has been read by most people who have read it at all as part of The Divine Invasion, part of Philip K. Dick's final trilogy of novels. And it tells the story of a man, a Martian colonist, hiding in his dome, listening to the music of the analogy for Linda Ronstadt. Philip K. Dick had this lifelong obsession with Linda Ronstadt, and he includes her as a character in many of his stories, usually as a musician. And the man living in his dome is quite happy with the artificial entertainment pumped into his dome. How like so many of us, and a growing number of us today, living in our digital domes, increasingly isolated from one another and increasingly reluctant to engage with real human life that doesn't meet our fantasy of what our human life and our human relationships should be like. And the space of this Martian colonist is invaded clearly by another colonist living nearby who is a woman who is sick. And in fact, she is dying. She's dying of sickness and she needs help. And the Martian colonist drags together the dregs of his empathy and repeatedly goes and visits this woman. And she's very manipulative, of course, because she's very scared, as all of us really are. We are all deeply scared of our mortality, of death and dying. And we all, on some level, are manipulative of each other to get the love and support that we need from each other. The prophetic lesson inside this Martian vision is something like escape is on the other side of reality. We can stay in an artificial kind of escapism that is fed into our digital dome. We can stay in isolation on our own, but to truly find escape from the sufferings of life, we have to go through reality. You have to go and have real relationships with real imperfect people. And this imperfection of humanity is something that Philip K. Dick picked up on again and again. Philip K. Dick said in interview that the challenge for science fiction was to depict real human relationships between men and women. And he tried to depict them, especially later in his career, in a story like Chains of Air, Web of Aether, one of his least popular stories. It receives very bad reviews when it is read, precisely because it's such a realistic depiction woven into the symbolism of science fiction that we usually turn to for fantasy and escape. But that escape has to come through true engagement with reality. The seventh prophetic vision of Philip K. Dick. The three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch is perhaps the weirdest, the most psychedelic, the strangest, and the most cryptic of all of Philip K. Dick's novels. It's about a future, an early prediction of climate change where the human population can't even go out during the day without almost dying of heat stroke, a future that we may well find ourselves living in. But it didn't come true by the year 2016 when the three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch is based. But that is the year that for many people our world seemed to become strange, deeply strange and weird, perhaps with the election of Donald Trump, a figure who looks somewhat like, who seems to be somewhat like the strange figure of Palmer Eldritch, who also resembles in some way that other iconic figure of our time, Elon Musk, this figure coming from outer space as a savior of human beings, but at the heart of the three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, the idea of layouts, doll houses for adults in this bleak, apocalyptic, climate change, overheating future. Humanity retreats to sets of dolls and furniture that depict a world that is better than the world that they actually live in. And where do we find ourselves increasingly from the year 2016 into the years that we now find ourselves in? Living ever more in virtual realities, in the unreal, the idea that I've commented on in previous essays, that we are retreating into the unreal, and that for all of the great, and I do believe they're fantastic creative possibilities that we can explore in the unreal, Philip K. Dick's warning to us, his vision is something like, be aware of the virtual unreal realities that you are being drawn into. In the three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, these are represented as physical toys, as layouts. But for us today, the virtual realities are proliferating social media, virtual realities themselves, augmented realities, the metaverse of Mark Zuckerberg. And this is only the beginning of the virtual realities that we are drawn into. And we can't resist being drawn into them. They are almost certainly the shape of our future. We are entering the unreal, but we have to be aware of them and constantly aware of how those realities can be manipulated. The sixth prophetic vision of Philip K. Dick. V.A.L.I.S. I was obsessed with the novel V.A.L.I.S to the extent that friends of mine made fun of me for repeatedly talking about this strange book by a strange writer they had never heard of. V.A.L.I.S, vast automated living intelligence system. In the first novel of Philip K. Dick's V.A.L.I.S trilogy, which is a very dark novel. It begins with a suicide. It continues into the complete mental collapse of its author, and it's then narrated in probably Philip K. Dick's greatest piece of writing. He narrates the story of Horse Lover Fat, which is a translation of Philip K. Dick, Philip Horse Lover Dick Fat. He narrates the story as Philip K. Dick, observing the story of Horse Lover Fat. And he's also in the story. It's a wonderful piece of experimental literature that is greatly undervalued in the literary world. But there is a lesson to take. V.A.L.I.S, the vast automated living intelligence system, is envisaged by Philip K. Dick as something like a satellite orbiting Earth, manipulating the history of humanity. Of course, a somewhat godlike object. Or another way to think of V.A.L.I.S is as a hyper object, an idea from the contemporary philosopher Timothy Morton, that our reality is penetrated by hyper objects that we can't truly comprehend. We certainly can't see them. They aren't obvious to our senses. An example of the hyperobject could include global warming. That we experience global warming as a hurricane here, a heat rise there, individual elements. And if we lived at an earlier time in history, we might have no idea that these were related, that there was a hyper object connecting all of these apparently unrelated events. The internet is a hyperobject. Capitalism is a hyperobject. The worth, the value of thinking of these phenomena as hyperobjects is so that we can understand their shape and predict how they might impact in our lives. That the hyperobject of capitalism, the hyperobject of global warming, is moving through your dimension of reality, like V.A.L.I.S, like a vast automated living intelligence systems. And these hyperobjects have their own agendas. What is Philip K. Dick's prophetic lesson for us? It's to learn to see the hyperobjects, to learn to perceive the vast automated living intelligence, capitalism, global warming, to understand that these hyperobjects are out there and that we are interacting with them. The fifth of Philip K. Dick's prophetic visions. The president of a major corporation awakes in hospital after a car crash. He's told by the doctor, "Sir, I have bad news for you. You are an electric ant, a humanoid robot, an android. You were made by your corporation because it was better for the share price to have an electric ant president." And the man, who now knows he is an electric ant, returns to his Connaught, his apartment. He orders equipment from the corporation he is still the president of, and he begins to investigate the interior of his robotic body, and he finds there a small tape reel. And he realizes that this microscopic cassette tape contains his reality and a series of punch holes, and he experiments with the punch holes, and he finds that when he covers up one of the punch holes, an object in his reality disappears. So the way that the tape works is that the sensor that the tape occludes contains all reality, and his perceptions that the tape represent is editing out the reality to present him with an understandable, a comprehensible reality on his scale as a humanoid electric ant. I won't spoil the end of the story for you. Go and read it. The idea that Philip K. Dick is exploring is that our fundamental idea about reality, that reality is nothing, into which, through a series of interactions of physical forces, something appears, could be inverted. What if, instead of nothing, was everything? What if the basis of our reality was the coexistence of everything at the same time? What changes would that make to our understanding of reality? The prophetic vision that I see in the electric ant is again something like: question the fundamental assumptions of your reality, because everything else is built upon those assumptions. All of the truths that you believe are shown to you by science or by religion are built on the basic assumptions of those systems. And to navigate the flux of our reality at the strange times we live in, you have to be willing to question the basic assumptions of your reality so that you know what they are, so that you can work with them, and so you know, crucially for Philip K. Dick, so you know how those assumptions can be used to manipulate you, to make you an electric ant under the control of others. You must question the fundamental assumptions of your reality. Reality, the question, what is reality? There is a single simple question at the heart of all of Philip K. Dick's best work. A simple question with a very complex answer. The question, what is reality? In the early part of Philip K. Dick's career, he played with that question simply to invent new cool ideas to sell his stories to magazines. And then in the mid part, he grew deeper. He went into more explorative philosophical ideas about the nature of reality. And this grew his own mind, his own consciousness, his questioning through the writing of science fiction made him a greater person, a greater thinker. And this finally opened up through his spiritual, transcendental experiences in the last part of his career, in his V.A.L.I.S trilogy, to his ascendancy to the role of a prophet of our modern contemporary times. And in the last three of his prophetic visions, the question of what is reality is central. Ubik is Philip K. Dick's most mysterious novel. It's a collision of cryptic, philosophical, science fictional ideas that arrive at no single clear conclusion. One of these ideas is the presence in the world of Ubik of psychic powers that are organized into small private organizations that then rent out their psychic abilities to combat the use of psychic powers to steal ideas from those corporations. Something that I think Philip K. Dick was somehow prophetically viewing the rise of cyber warfare and cyber security, and these special individuals that we have now who have the cyber knowledge to secure your systems against other very similar individuals who can come along and steal the data from within them. Also, the object of Ubik, the ubiquitous object, which is marketed at the beginning of every chapter of Ubik as a spray can or a tin of beans or some kind of consumer brand which is being sold to the world as Ubik. And all of this is about disruption. The disruption of technology in our culture. And what do we talk about today but tech disruptors? Who are the biggest businesses in our world? They are the tech disruptors, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, who have these somewhat psychic insights into us. All of the data they collect on us allows them potentially to control us in ways that we have never been controlled before. And in Ubik, this disruption is played out on the greatest level by a character whose psychic powers allow her to change the past and therefore control the present. And the characters in Ubik, at one point in the story, believe that one of their number has been killed, but in fact, they have all been killed, and they are now in a reality being manipulated by one individual with psychic powers. It's extremely confusing, but here is, I think, an idea at the heart of Ubik, a prophetic lesson for us to take from the work of Philip K. Dick, that our reality is being held between us. There is no objective reality. There is no reality of objects. There is no fundamental reality that we can dig down to, even by understanding the laws of physics. Reality is a construct being held between all of us and manipulable by any of us. And some of us have very great powers to manipulate that reality, which is a construct being held between us. The third of Philip K. Dick's prophetic visions. The second of these prophetic visions comes in Philip K. Dick's epic exegesis, built on his 2374 experiences. And at the core of this exegesis, this 8,000 words of borderline insane, perhaps explicitly insane, some might believe, obsessive attempt to understand Christian theology and the deepest secrets of our reality, was Philip K. Dick's idea that Rome never fell, that he had seen through to a reality where we were all still living under the Roman Empire, and he was a renegade Christian trying to escape that empire. There's an idea in there. It's something like the understanding that time does not truly progress, that the progressive idea that is at the core of how we understand the modern world, and certainly how science fiction understands modernity, that we can progress into a future time where there are future technologies that have really changed things. Philip K. Dick was instead thinking about the older way of understanding time, that time is cyclical. And if you spend time with the exegesis and the ideas that came out of Philip K. Dick's exegesis, you get to this idea that Rome never fell because time is cyclical. And these powers, like the Roman Empire, they fall for a time and then they rise again. And perhaps they were never even really gone in the time between. And that our sense of progress is merely an illusion, a comforting illusion. What do we have? This idea in our society that we're told again and again that there were terrible things that happened in the past, but they're not happening now. And it's very comforting to believe that. But maybe Philip K. Dick is suggesting it's only an illusion and that the true reality is cyclical and eternal and it never really changes. Deep ideas about the nature of reality that Philip K. Dick was expressing in his prophetic visions. Number one, the last of these, perhaps the most important of the prophetic lessons that Philip K. Dick was attempting to communicate to us through his stories, and probably his greatest novel as well, The Man in the High Castle. This was adapted to television. It was okay, but it didn't really understand what Philip K. Dick was trying to say, like so many of Philip K. Dick's adaptations to screen. It missed the prophetic vision at the heart of the story. The Man in the High Castle is the story of what was, when Philip K. Dick was writing, a near future America, some decades after the Second World War, where America had been conquered by the Japanese and Europe had been conquered by the Nazis. And we were now all living in this reality. It's often called an alternate history, but really, The Man in the High Castle is a story of alternate realities and competing realities. Hidden in The Man in the High Castle is another story called The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, written by the titular Man in the High Castle, a novelist, Hawthorne Abenson, who is writing about an America that is free and that is not dominated by the Japanese and the Nazis. And as the characters read this novel and travel to find Hawthorne Abenson, they find themselves increasingly living in the world that he described. The implication being that if we were all persuaded that the Nazis had won World War II, we would live in a world where they had the nature of our reality is not objective, is not physical, it is held between us, and there is a competition to control the story, the narrative of our reality. How often do we hear this talked about in advertising, in marketing, in politics? Who controls the narrative? That everyone is competing to control the narrative that we live in, because the narrative is not just a story that is being told that we can step out of. It fundamentally defines our reality. Stories are our reality. This is the prophetic vision at the core of so much of Philip K. Dick's work, and the number one vision that we can take from him to understand the strangeness of the times that we are living in. That we are living in a reality that is fundamentally fictional, that is a narrative, that is governed by stories and the people who tell those stories. Like all prophets who have come to us through the history of humankind, the ideas of Philip K. Dick are challenging. They challenge. They go out of their way to deliberately challenge our answers to the question, what is reality? If your answer to that question, what is reality, is absolute, if you are convinced by a model of reality that you have been given, then the ideas of Philip K. Dick will seem pointless, absurd, perhaps like lies or fantasies to you. But if you, like I and many others, find yourself living in strange times, the wisdom, the prophetic visions of Philip K. Dick may have something to offer you. We thought we knew what the deal of our society was, what we had to do and what our society would do for us. And now we find very often that the real rules of society were written somewhere else. We see that many people, far too many people, are still made the other in our society, and that we ourselves may risk being the other, or may have already been forced onto the other side of that terrible barrier. We see that we have more opportunities than ever to escape our reality and to not experience the truth of our reality, but we see that these virtual realities are some kind of trap being manipulated for us. We're aware of the virtual unrealities that await us. We're learning to see the hyper objects like climate change, like global capitalism, that impact our lives that previously we were ignorant to. We are questioning the fundamental assumptions of our reality, whether those assumptions come from scientific institutes or from churches or ancient religions. We can see how our reality increasingly is a construct held between us in groups, a collaborative project that we are making together. We understand that as much as things seem to progress, they also in a way remain forever cyclically the same. And more than anything, we see that we are in a fight for the narrative of our reality, that our reality in some way that is just as real as the reality of fundamental forces and atoms and molecules, that our reality is a story, and that the story is changing around us, and that we have lost any agreement on what that story is. For some people, the reality of our story is an ancient medieval religion that they want to impose on the world. For other people, it is an endless deterministic clockwork machine and the total absence of human free will. For some people, it is the story of a nation that has defined their reality or the reality of their family for centuries in the past. We are living in a nexus of competing stories, and Philip K. Dick was among the first to truly see and understand this, and he communicated it to us in his fantastic works of science fiction, short stories, and novels, because where else would a true prophet appear than in the realm of science fiction, the realm where we are creating the new mythos, the new story of our society. And Philip K. Dick gazed deeply into the mythos, and the mythos stared back into him, and it gave him prophetic visions to communicate to us what our new story could possibly be. And amongst the dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of storytellers competing for our attention to define our stories for us, all of them, whether they are famed novelists, advertising executives, leading global politicians, all competing for the narrative, all wanting in some way some control. Philip K. Dick was the greatest of these storytellers, because Philip K. Dick sought not to control you with stories, but to wake you up from the stories that you were immersed in, to wake you up to the reality of how stories shape and form our reality. This has been an episode of the Science Fiction Podcast with Damien Walter. You can join the workshop related to this class into how to build realities like Philip K. Dick. Go to damiengwalter.com to learn more. Thank you very much.